So now I'll transition over to Sarah Izzo, one of our class presidents. And I'll just say we felt that she was very appropriate to lead this conversation because Sue has said before that intelligence is really all about uncertainty and opportunity. And Sarah has certainly led our class during a great time of uncertainty. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah to introduce our capstone speaker, Sue Gordon.
Thank you for that, Alexis. That's so sweet. Well, good morning, everyone. Quick housekeeping items before I jump in. Would love to see all of your beautiful faces. I'm sure Sue would too. This is a breakfast and coffee safe space, so feel free to do that. And then also, I believe, Sue, yep, looks like you've got your, or is that Diet Coke? Looks like it. And also, I believe Sue will be talking for a little bit, and then there'll be time for questions. So feel free to either put them in the chat, either for everyone to see, or just send them to me directly. And with that, I think we'll jump in. I promised her I would keep this quick. So I'm really excited to introduce to you the Honorable Sue Gordon, who served as the 5th Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence from 2017 to 2019. In this role, she worked with the Director of National Intelligence to lead the intelligence community, focusing on advancing intelligence integration, expanding outreach and partnerships, and driving innovation across the intelligence community. This is after a long, successful career. One thing that I thought was really interesting and worth highlighting was that in 1998, she designed and drove the formation of In-Q-Tel, which is a private nonprofit company whose primary purpose is to deliver innovative technology solutions for the agency and the intelligence community. But maybe most importantly, she has a Bachelor of Science degree in zoology from Duke, and was a 3-time captain of the Duke women's basketball team. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Sue, and take it away.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Alexis. Thanks, Ben. I'm absolutely delighted to be here this morning, and please eat, drink, and be merry. Couple things. Number one, I'm honored to be part of this group because our hopes and dreams are resting on you. I just think you need to embrace that. Is you are or will become exactly what we need if you believe you must be. And so this investment in yourselves at the LEADS program kind of demonstrates, but also all the other things you do. Man, this is a time that we need leaders more than anyone. There's this great TED Talk that I just love by a guy named Eddie Obeng, and he's a British organizational theorist, and it's probably about 5-7 years old now, the TED Talk, and I call it After Midnight. And he said that sometime after midnight, we all went to bed, and when we woke up in the morning, the world was different, and it looked exactly the same, but nothing we had done before worked. And I opine to you that that's where we are right now. We are just in a place where we're not going to be able to draft off of the work of our predecessors. We're going to have to create anew. And leadership, in fact, allows that. Leadership, in my way of thinking it establishes vision, and it sets a quest. It inspires action and achievement. It allows you to overcome obstacles and solve problems. It allows innovation and advance, and it unleashes the power of the people that work with you and work for you. And I really want you to embrace that. Great leadership is really about creating the conditions where the people that serve with you can take you places. I think somewhere in the course of my career, I became the person that everyone thought was a great risk taker. I'll give you a secret. The reason I would take risks, the reason I would set a goal that was far out, is that I knew that the women and men that worked for me would never let me fail. And so this fundamental confidence in them, and then the quest to give them the space or the responsibility, the resources that they need to take you someplace, is really the magic of leadership. So a little bit, I think a lot of people think that if you get to a cool place, like I was lucky to get, that it's been just this great ascent where everything worked out well and you did well. I, did the things perfectly and took only jobs that were ascending up a ladder. I'll tell you that I got asked to lead things I had no idea how to lead. I took jobs I didn't want because somebody asked me to. I got dream jobs. I took steps backward because I was asked to do so. I took on tasks that were undefined, and I had to figure out what in the world my boss meant, because if I asked too many questions, they'd start lying and I'd be too limited. I took on tasks that I thought might turn out badly for me, and sometimes they did. Even though the thing I did persisted, it doesn't mean that it happened without cost to me. I had moments that tested everything that I thought I knew and thought I believed in. I've been flummoxed and lonely. I will tell you that this leadership thing is just as hard as they say, particularly when we get to what we're going to talk about today, which is decision making. I've worried along the way that I haven't been a good wife, a good mother, a good sister, a good daughter, a good friend. I've run things, created things, downsized things, eliminated things, transformed things. And I've been both hired and fired. And here's the cool thing, it's all turned out okay. And so just as you think about what's yawning in front of you, and as you're preparing and investing and really working hard at this leadership thing, just don't think of it as a sprint. Think of it as an aggregate experience. So real quickly, what I'm going to do today, I'll give you a quick romp of my career. I'll talk about my theory of decision making, because I think that is the most critical of all leadership skills. And then I'll give you some examples of decisions that I made along the way, and kind of not so much what I did, because that isn't important. You'll do different things. What's important is kind of how I thought about those. And then at the end, if I can do all that in 30 minutes, we'll talk a little bit about leadership style, depending on where you are and who you're leading, because it does actually matter and it changes. And I've got some tragic examples when I didn't figure that out for a while. And then how position in the moment changes your leadership approach. So not only what position you hold, but what moment you're in changes how you lead. So just, you will develop a leadership style. You have a set of leadership beliefs, but remember that don't make those sacrosanct, because it's all about going somewhere. And if they're not following, you're not leading. So just remember, you have some principles and a framework and things you believe. But your style is the style you need, that is true to you, but is also the style for the moment. Okay, so let's talk about the role of personal values in decision making. And let's bounce up and just talk decision making a little bit. I forgot, I was going to tell you a little bit about my career. So I was a Zoe major from Duke. I couldn't decide if I was going to get my PhD or go to law school, so I thought I'd get a job. The CIA was on campus. I'm the child of a naval officer, so public service is kind of in my blood. And I thought, well, that sounds cool. And I was hired by the CIA to do analysis of Soviet biological warfare. So that makes sense, right? The Zoe major, critters, biological warfare. The problem was, in the year it took me to get my clearance, the agency went through a downsizing and my job was eliminated. So I show up, a 21-year-old with a bright, shiny security clearance, and I get told that the job doesn't exist and I have 30 days to find work, otherwise I won't be there. And so my career kind of starts at this interesting moment of, do you take your ball and bat and go home and find something else, or do you try and find new work? I did, and the work I found, this is incredibly relevant to my degree, the work I found was an analyst of Soviet missiles. More than that, a technical analysis of Soviet missiles. And so kind of my first lesson is, how do you start as a Zoe major and become an analyst of Soviet missiles? Here's the trick. You aren't stuck with the knowledge you have. You can always keep learning. And actually I have throughout my career. So I analyzed Soviet missile systems, and then space systems, and then I got pretty good at that. And so I got hired by another component of the CIA to build US spacecraft collectors. I built clandestine collection systems. Then I went back, and when I was probably 26 years old, I got my first branch my first leadership position, leading analysis of Soviet space systems. I led analysis for about 7 years, and then I had a boss that said, hey, we need someone to lead our information technology division. I went, information technology, ew, I don't want to do that. Because I got to tell you, in the late 80s, IT wasn't the cool stuff it is now. It was wiring closets, and it just wasn't what I wanted to do. And he said, please do it. And I said, no. And he said, really, Sue, please do it. And I said, okay. And actually that changed the trajectory of my career, learning a totally different skill. In 88, I didn't realize that IT would be the technology that defined the next generation. But I took that job. That transitioned into the opportunity that Sarah mentioned, where the director of the CIA needed something cool in his strategic plan. So he turned to the director of science and technology, and he said, give me something cool to put in my strategic plan. And she said, well, you know, we need a way to get to the technology in Silicon Valley. Because in the late 90s, Silicon Valley wanted nothing to do with the intelligence community and the US national security community. And more than that, we didn't have the contracting mechanisms to be able to allow them in. And so the director of science and technology turned to this young up and coming leader, and she said, Sue, figure it out. And I said, I don't get what you want me to do. And she said, no, really figure it out. And that became In-Q-Tel, which was a totally different approach than anyone had tried before. To tell you how different it was, in 1996, I came up with an idea where we would give the CIA's toughest challenges in an unclassified form to a group of private citizens who had formed a company. And I wouldn't tell them what to do with the $30 million we gave them. I would just told them to do good things to solve the problem. And in 1996, that was a heretical approach to doing something different. But that approach led to really cool things called Google Earth and Palantir and Red Hat and Dataminr, and so many of the things you know now came out of the formation of In-Q-Tel that invested in startup companies that we thought had promise against our tough problems. So kind of moving along, then I left for 7 years. I'll talk about that decision in a minute. I came back, I got into clandestine operations, learned a whole new risk equation that I'd had any other part in my career. And then one day I was minding my own business. My boss asked me if I'd go backwards and lead cyber operations. Then I had a new director that asked me if I'd lead support for the agency. So after doing a whole career of doing technical mission work and operational work and S&T work, a new director of the CIA said, Sue, I'd like you to lead the support unit. Support at the CIA is half of all the people, and probably a third of the money works for the director of support. It's finance, logistics, facilities, security, IT, HR. Every one of the more than 300 stations and bases worldwide are actually run and managed by the director of support. And then I did that job. It was so much fun. It was a different leadership job. And then I was minding my own business, and the director of CIA said, Sue, will you figure out how to do cyber for the agency? And I said, I don't know what you mean. And he said, I don't either. And we'll talk about how you break down something when a boss tells you to do something you don't know how to do. I did that. I delivered him a pretty cool study that got the whole agency mad at me. So I got voted off the island while he used it to transform the agency. And I went to the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and was the deputy director. Learned how to operate in the open, learned about combat support, learned how to lead women and men who were entirely different than the women and men of the CIA that I had spent my whole career growing up with and as. And then I got to be the principal deputy director of national intelligence, which, just to tell you the extent of that, overseeing 17 agencies, more than 100,000 people, and about $80 billion budget. But coolest is you sit at the national security policymaking table. And I will tell you, the last 3 years of my career were really interesting. So pretty rangy job for a woman with a bachelor's degree in zoology. I think, if I forget to tell you this, the transportation in my career was saying yes investing myself in the outcome that was expected of me. And somewhere along the way, I became the woman that you called if you needed something done. And so what I'm going to focus on for the rest of the time of this act of the leadership act of doing, man, you've had so many great talks about leadership traits, and those are really important: who you are, what you develop, how you operate, how you even think about things. But there's another kind of leadership, which is the leadership of doing things. How do you achieve things? How do you deliver things? That relies on all those personal attributes, but you also have to put it into motion. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about that. So that's my romp. So let me talk about decision-making. I've got 4 rules for decision-making, or truths about it. Number 1, decision-making is the most critical skill of all you can develop. It is the one that impels progress. Most people try not to make decisions. What they try to do is to wait for the world to turn so that the answer becomes obvious. Because deciding things requires a leap, and good decisions are before you are forced to do it. And that means you don't ever have perfect information. And so learning how to make decisions is the most critical skill. If you can master it, you are the rarest of things, and you will be sought after in ways that you just can't imagine. So this decision-making thing is pretty sweet stuff. 2, my dad had all these sayings growing up, and one of them was, do you know how you learn to lift a cow? And I'm like, I don't know how you learn to lift a cow. And he said, you practice by lifting a calf every day. So what I would tell you as the decision makers and the leaders that we are going to count on, you need to practice in terms of making decisions. I tell young leaders all the time, make every decision you can and then 2 more. You have got to learn how to make this leap. How do you look at a situation and say, okay, I've taken in all the data we need, and I know we need to go here. My trick is to ask myself, once I think I've gathered all the data, is can I bear the consequence of being wrong? If I can bear the consequence of being wrong, then I'm going to jump and go ahead and do it. And here's the cool thing about decision making. If you make the wrong decision, it will become evident. Just make a new one. Now, you can't make bad decisions all the time, but you can make successive ones. 3, and this is one of the things that you really wanted me to focus on, is what are the considerations in making a decision? And I think there are 3. The first is you, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. The second is the mission, and the mission is what you're hired to do. What is the outcome you're trying to achieve? So you can be self-righteous, but if you are righteous in leadership, if you are righteous in decision-making, you're going to be wrong. So just always remember when you're in decision-making, and I'm going to talk a lot about who you are and how you do it, but the mission, what you're paid to do, why you're in a leadership position, has got to be foremost in your mind. As a matter of fact, a lot of times when you have kind of an ambiguous task, focusing ruthlessly on the outcome will actually open up trade space for you, not close it down. And then the third consideration between self and mission is your community. What are you a part of? Generally, missions are being accomplished within the context of an organization. And, you know, I'm a Rubenstein Fellow at Duke. I'm lucky enough to be teaching a class right now. Yeah, I have to care about how I want to go about it. I'm trying to give my students something, but I'm also a representative of Duke University. So when you're making decisions, the community of which you're a part has to be a factor in that. And I'm going to go through a bunch of decisions that I made. And again, don't think about the decision I made. We'll talk about how I made it. But let's go back to this first one, is what's the role of self in decision-making? Okay, so first things first, you have got to know who you are. You have got to be willing to look at yourself. And when I say that, that means, okay, so first thing's true about me. I'm the 3rd child of a naval officer. right? That there are a lot of things that are packed into that. Number one, I'm terrified of my older brother and sister. Two, I'm always willing to give something away because I hate conflict and discontent. So if I own something that will make someone else happy, I'll always give it away. Third child of a naval officer. My strengths are I've got enough IQ points to rub together. I'm willing to use them. I am driven to deliver outcome. I feel very responsible to the women and men around me. I tend to never get tired. And if I can do something and if I can figure out how to do it, I will if it's necessary. All those things are strengths. They are all my weaknesses. And so you got to know how those come into play as weaknesses. So me, if I've got a job to do, I'll work 3 days worth of effort for every 1 day of work. How do you think that feels to be working for me? That means you leave at the end of your day. And when you come in the next morning, I've done 2 more days of work and you thought you were caught up, but no, you can't catch up with me. I had someone say that Sue's always happy and never satisfied. I thought, well, that's pretty apt. How do you think it is to work for a boss that's never satisfied? And it's not actually that I'm never satisfied. It's only because I'm so excited about where we can go that once I can see we can go somewhere else, I want to go there and I don't spend time celebrating. All the really terrible mistakes I've made in my career generally have one feature, and that is I thought I was in control. That if I just worked harder, did more, tried harder, stayed with it longer, then it would be all okay. I just tend to forget that there are other people in the equation that don't see it necessarily as I do, aren't willing to give what I would. And so being so personally committed actually can turn into a negative. So I think just knowing who you are and what are your truths, what do you believe, what kind of line in the sand will you draw, what won't you do, what will you want, all matter in decision making. And the tougher the decision, and particularly if you ever find yourself in the situation where you have been either personally or organizationally wronged, your response to that is mostly about who you are, deciding who you're going to be, deciding what the next action is going to be, not lashing out in kind, but deciding who you're going to be. And all of that, you can't make any decisions. You can't be, quite frankly, be a leader if you don't know all those things. But here's the rub in decision making. Even though it takes you, it requires you to know all that. It is never about you. If you ever insert your preferences, the outcome you want, your self-protection into the act of decision-making, you will lose opportunity. You might lose respect of your peers and colleagues, which is really hard to get back. You might lose trust. But mostly is you will lose the opportunity to do really big things if you govern the trade space by what is personally beneficial to you. And if I think about some of the things I've been able to do, they are mostly because I never tried to protect myself. I never took on a job and wanted to make sure I looked good. I never took on a job and wanted to make sure that I got promoted. I never took on a job and wanted to make sure that everyone knew it was me. I never took on a job and wanted to make someone else be harmed or show them up for something else. So this notion of both knowing who you are and bringing that to the table, but not letting it be involved in decision-making is really key. And here's the coolest thing about it. When you do that, not only have you opened up decision space, it's like an athlete that can actually commit to the point of failure. Like they're going to run so hard after a ball that they might find that they can't get there. But if they decide they don't want to show that they can't get there, that they back off a little bit. Well, the same thing is true in this. If you add your personal stuff in, you will limit the decision space that you have. But more than that will happen is your people won't forgive you. So I can do two things. One, I can inspire people to come with me. People will come with me. That's a responsibility to not dash their hopes. But the other thing is because everyone knows that everything I do, I pursue truly with a true outcome. When I err, they forgive me because I believed in what we were doing. And I was not trying to do it for any purpose other than the outcome that was stated. So some really cool things happen when you both know who you are and you don't invest that. So let me give you some examples of some decisions. I would start in reverse order in terms of the last decision I had to make as a federal employee, because that kind of puts everything into play. But let me just go through to a couple in terms of how those three things happen. The self, the mission, and the community matter. So I talked about this task I got of forming In-Q-Tel. It was awesome. I didn't know how to do it. Like I said, my first decision there was to take on the task when I didn't know how to do it. And the reason sometimes you have to take on a task that you don't know how to do is because sometimes your boss doesn't know how to do it. They just know what they want to have accomplished. They have no idea how to do it. As a matter of fact, if you force them to describe it so that you are only doing a task rather than figuring out a job, you will have just wrecked it. Because I guarantee you they have no idea. And if they start defining it, you have just given away your trade space in terms of doing it. So the first thing is, if you are asked to take on a task that is undefined and you ask a couple questions and you can't get a good answer, quit asking and go figure it out. And the reason why you have to figure it out is if it isn't your vision, you won't know what you can give away in the accomplishment of the outcome, right? If it's somebody else's vision, you have to carry all that along with you. A corollary to that is, have you ever had someone or known of a boss that says, well, I think this is a dumb idea, but the boss says we have to do it, right? This notion of passing on someone else's guidance through you without you being committed to it is terrible. If you take it on, whether it is an order from your boss or whether it is a tasking to do something, you have got to make it your own, because otherwise you won't be able to accomplish it. So In-Q-Tel was that. The boss only had an idea of what they want to have happen, gave it to me to figure out how to do it. The problem with In-Q-Tel was the agency hated it. The leadership of the agency writ large absolutely hated it. And anytime you do something new, the organization generally will despise it and try and kill it before it can ever take resources from them. And so one of the decisions that you have to make when you have something like that is, how fast am I going to go? Right? How much consensus am I going to build? So with In-Q-Tel, it was 7 months from the time I was given the task to the time a new entity was incorporated. I didn't have time to talk to every organization about what they thought. I didn't have time to build consensus in the building, because if I had, we would have slowed down. So remember when I made that point is sometimes you have to, if you know enough to decide, you have to go, because getting more will just slow the decision. So if you're given the responsibility to create something new, consider the possibility that you might have to move faster than you might be comfortable. And that means you have to be sure in what the outcome is going to be. Probably after In-Q-Tel, and until I lost my job as the principal deputy, the biggest decision I made was leaving the Central Intelligence Agency. I loved it. I'd been there about 20 years. I just finished the triumph of In-Q-Tel. I'm married to someone who also works for the agency. I had a 13 and a 9-year-old. My husband was traveling for work. I was running around making deals. And I get a call one night from my 9-year-old who says, Mom, Jay, my 13-year-old son, had run away. And I was out at this business dinner. I had to leave it. I get home and my son luckily had come back, but I read the note that he left and I went, oh my God, he's processing information wrong. He's carrying too much responsibility with too little ability to carry it out. And it became obvious to me that this person who had cheated time for 20 years, I was really senior, really fast, and I had great jobs and I loved my work, but it became obvious that I couldn't both be the mom I wanted to be and the employee I wanted to be. And so I walked in the next day and I gave 2 weeks notice and I quit. And let me put quitting in context. In one day, we lost more than half our family's income just because I couldn't be who I wanted to be. So we talked about this self-mission and community. That was one that it was a personal decision I needed to make. The organization didn't want to lose me. So they said, Sue, I'll tell you what, we'll give you part-time work, right? It won't be as stressful as thing you've had, just part-time work. I know me. I'm an in or out gal. Part-time work would have been a terrible thing for me. I would have gotten less pay and I would have done more work and it would have been awful. I'm not. And then they said, okay, Sue, so part-time work's not the right thing. We'll give you a job that is inconsequential, doesn't matter. And you know what? If you don't show up, it's okay. Because they wanted to keep me. And I turned that down too, because that would piss me off. Because I had never resented my time away from family, because I was fulfilled in both things. If all of a sudden I'm spending nonsensical time on something that doesn't matter, I'd really resent it. So I decided to leave because of who I am. When I left, it was really scary because I was afraid I wouldn't be cool anymore. And we can talk about those personal decisions. But the smartest decision I made is I didn't ask the organization for anything. I didn't say, hey, I'd like to leave for some indeterminate period of time, and I'd like to be guaranteed a promotion when I get back. Or I'd like you to guarantee me a job when I come back. Or I'd like you to guarantee the job I want when I get back. In other words, when you want to make a decision when it comes to your personal life, well, actually any decision, you get to make the choice, but you don't get to choose the consequence. So when you're in the middle of making decisions, make sure that all your energy is focused on the rightness of your choice, not the ameliorating the consequences, because that just muddies the water, particularly when it's purposeful. And then we could talk about how I decided to come back. I told you about my job as the director of support. We could talk about a lot of decisions, like how do you send people overseas into very dangerous environments, knowing that they may not come back. I was the director of support when Benghazi happened. Those were my 2 men that were on the roof of the building that I had essentially sent out to that place, and we had not made sure that we understood the security situation. So how do you make those decisions? And the answer is you make sure the decision was worthy of the man, not make sure it was a decision where nothing bad could happen. So there are a lot of decisions like that you'll have to make that are really consequential. Just break it down into what is the decision that is yours to make. Make sure it's a legitimate decision and recognize that there are other players making it at the same time. Cyber study was an interesting decision. So this was where I was happy as the director of support. I love that job. And John Brennan asked me to do a study. When he asked me to do the task, unlike when I was asked to do the In-Q-Tel task, I knew it was going to be a problem for me. And I even said to John, I said, John, I'll take on the task, but you have to tell me you know who I am, and that when I give you a report, that you will trust it before you understand it. The first point was, I'm not going to give you some inconsequential list of 73 things we could do to make cyber better at the agency. I'm going to give you 6 big ideas that are going to transform the agency. So if you don't want just 6 big ideas, and if you're not going to act on it, don't ask me. And he said, oh, yeah. So I know who you are. And then the second is, you have to act before you have to trust me before you understand it. I was afraid that with John, if I did the study, he would take it, and before he acted on it, he would try and redo it and have to redo it. And that would take time, and then it would just go to hell in a handbasket. He assured me that he would do both the things that I asked. He, in fact, did none of those things. I delivered the study, and all of a sudden, I had been on an upward trajectory. I had a leadership position. I no longer had a leadership position. All my peers disliked me. He was going to have to make some tough decisions because he liked the study. And now I became the thing that was expendable so that he could make that transformation happen. So that was one where I think I saw what was going to happen coming, and I still did the work. And I will tell you, that's probably one of the hardest things to do. We could talk about is, I told you, you can't put your personal interest into the task. It doesn't mean it doesn't hurt when you don't get credit. And it doesn't mean it doesn't hurt when these things happen. But I will still tell you that if you can find your way not, you will have a whole set of accomplishments that the organization got because you were willing to do that. And my dad always said, there are people who get awards and there are people who get jobs. So I always wanted to be the person that would get the next job, but you've got to sort that out for yourself. And then I guess the last thing I'll talk about, and then I'll shut up so that we can answer some questions, is my last 2 years as a federal employee. So in the spring of 2017, I was asked if the president wanted to nominate me to be the principal deputy director of national intelligence. Career intelligence officer, had to decide that it was okay that I was going to become a political appointee. What's interesting about that decision is, when you're a leader and a government employee, you are just effecting the policies of whoever the president is. To decide to become an appointee of this president, I then felt like that meant I owned not only the policies, because it imputed to me, but also the way those policies were affected. So that was a really big personal decision for me. Was I willing to become a presidential appointee, even though mine was one that was mostly doing straight intelligence? But it was a big decision. I remember his proclamation on banning transgender individuals from serving in the military. I almost withdrew my nomination because I just thought that was so abhorrent. We'd been there before in the 50s with African Americans, in the 70s with women, in the 80s with LGBTQ. It just, with women, it was just, I couldn't do it. But that was a big decision. I ultimately decided that the contribution I could make was worth that maybe reputational hit. And I knew who I was, so I could never be influenced to do something else. So I decided I would be nominated. On the day I was actually nominated, I was diagnosed with cancer. And so that was another decision I had to make. All my friends who hated that I was going to become a member of this administration, but tolerated because I thought I could save America, now we're like, oh my God, Sue, you have to make personal decisions about your life. So all those things come into decision-making. I decided to do it. We go through 2 years that everyone would argue was a pretty tough years from an intelligence community perspective, with Russian interference and threat assessments that differed from the president, and the president really not thinking very much of the intelligence community, but it was all okay. My boss basically got fired. I was supposed to become the acting director, and then all of a sudden I get fired. And I didn't really get fired, but I was going to. And so here's the day that happens. I find out that he's not going to make me acting director of national intelligence. Statute from Congress says that I have to be. And so now we have a fight set up. Congress is begging me to make him fire me. How do you decide what to do? Here's what I decided. And I'm going to break it down into the three things that we said before. Who am I? So the first thing is there were lots of things I could have done. I could have called my favorite reporters. I could have gotten people to lobby for the press. I could have done all sorts of things to burn down the house personally. Did I say I'm the third child of a naval officer? And the third child of a naval officer, when their boss who appointed them to the position says he no longer wants you in that job, you give a cheery aye. And you resign so you don't make him fire you. It isn't about, I didn't want to be fired. Gang, I was fired. But you don't want to make your boss do that when they have the authority to make you not. So the first thing is that's who I am. You know, I didn't go make public statements in the subsequent year and a half. You haven't heard me excoriating the president of the United States, even though he stole my life's work from me unceremoniously and he was totally wrong, because that's who I am. So that was one. Then I wrote a resignation letter, and the resignation letter was really for the women and men in the intelligence community. It was for my community. And what I wanted them to know is it would be okay. I could have made it seem like the free world was going to end because Susan M. Gordon was no longer going to be in that position, but that would not have served either the mission or the community. And it would have exacerbated the rift between the intelligence community and the president. So part of my consideration in terms of how I did it was to make sure that my community both knew that I thought they were going to be okay, mission, and that they weren't harmed further because the president would have to use this event to further show that the intelligence community was not on his side. So I think, you know, I'll end there. And I'll just tell you, leadership is the best. There's so many lessons we have. If I had another whole session, I'd go through my 20, but decision-making is the big one. Decision-making actually is what you're put in positions of leadership to do. It isn't a small thing. It does come from a place of your character, your strength, your abilities, your vision, but it is always affected for the mission, the women and men and the community. And if you can balance those two, you're going to have a really fun time. I think I've talked about the issues of how position changes power, but ask that if you want to ask a question. But let's open it up now to other questions, and we'll see if I hit any of the targets you were after.
Well, thank you so much. I know I feel really lucky to have you as a professor and get to hear this once a week. I hope that you return in these first years, can hear from you more in the years to come. But so this question actually really resonated with me. I recently in an ethics class had to answer some of the questions that you proposed, like what are your lines in the sand? And I think throughout the past 45 minutes or so, you talked about the importance of knowing who you are. And for those of us who might struggle to answer that question right now, what are some of the things that you would recommend we do to be able to answer those questions and learn who we are over time?
So first thing, you just have to be able to look at yourself and your motivations and why you're feeling what you're feeling. So first it's just who are you? What matters to you? What are you willing to give up? What aren't you willing to give up? So me, I'll give up time. I'll give up positions. There is nothing that I can imagine happening to me that would ever preclude me getting up the next day. And so that creates some space. But that's where I am. That may not be where you are. And so first, just kind of knowing your conditions, just really being introspective about that. The second is you already have a leadership record. You have already made a bunch of decisions in your life. Look at those, judge them. Did it work out well? Did you do the best you could? For me, I always try and say, did I do everything that I could? If something didn't go well, I can almost always find something that I could have done better. And I never am critical about the other things. until I've really examined all the things that I could do better. And here's an interesting thing that I've discovered. Every time you get a successive leadership position, you can do the next level leadership position. Like you're smart enough. Like I could put any of you in the position that I last had, the principal deputy director of national intelligence, and you could do it. You could. You wouldn't be very good, right? Because you just don't have the experiences. You haven't done enough things, but you could do it. And so the question is, as you're dragging your experiences along, are you taking the lessons you learned in one and applying it to the next? So I think that's how you learn who you are and what's important to you, and just kind of be your own learning lab. And if you're lucky, you've got some friends along the way who will call you on your shit. Like, but just be willing to look into it, be willing to consider the possibility that you're the jerk and say, why did that go that way? It's not true always that you're the problem, but asking yourself first, that will help.
I think the friendship part is certainly really important there, having the right people around you.
Well, like Dave Petraeus, I don't know if you know anything about his tenure at the CIA. So Dave Petraeus was a very storied general. He became the director of the CIA. He made the decision to bring no one with him. So he had been a 4-star general, and he came to the CIA in a civilian suit, and Director Petraeus, not General Petraeus, and he brought no one with him. It was during that time that he ended up having an affair with somebody. I have always wondered, because he always kept all of us at arm's length. Like we were his besties when he needed us, but we were staff officers when he didn't. I always wondered if he had some of his bubbas around, they would have said, what are you doing? Right? So have people around you that you listen to.
You also talked about the importance, well, I guess first you said you're someone who likes to take risks. And then you talked about the importance of bringing a team along with you. And how do you inspire the people below you? And do you sometimes have people working for you that might not necessarily have buy-in yet or believe in that? And how do you handle inspiring them?
Yeah, so two different takes on that. So one is, well, maybe three. I think a leader that sets a clear vision and says we can go there and believes that that the job can be done is inspiring. People will want to come. People are cynical because they're protecting themselves, because they're afraid that if they commit to it and it doesn't work out, it will hurt. So this act of setting a vision, I think, is an inspiring thing. 2, sometimes your leadership style and your leadership lexicon has nothing to do with the leadership style and the leadership lexicon of the people that you work with. Before I became the director of support, I think on the literal scale, I don't exist. And on the aspirational scale, I'm just not. I'm just aspirational and not literal. You know, I'm an ENTP, so I don't believe that there are steps. You know, what's step 1? I don't know. You have to have a step 1. You just go there. We trip along the cloud. So that had worked for the part of the organization I was in. When I came into the director of support, these are the most concrete people I have ever met in my entire life. So I have my first town hall. They are inspired to come with me. And then over the next 6 months, it gets bad. Like they're getting frustrated. I'm getting frustrated. They never can deliver. That's because we weren't speaking at all the same language. And it was my responsibility to change my approach, not the tasks I wanted of them, not the outcome we must deliver, but how I talk to them and how I reference things. So if you find that you are losing lock on the people that wanted to come, then you have to change it. The third thing is kind of what you mentioned. When you're transforming, you set that vision, people are inspired, and then you talk about people getting on the bus. I always think I'm so damned inspirational that I can convince everyone if I just try a little harder, just, try a different approach, explain it a little better. I can get them all on the bus. No, you can't. Here's the deal. Some people actually don't want to be there for their reasons. And it's not even bad. They're just their reasons. And once you believe you've set the quest, you've set the condition, you have explained it as well as you might, if you insist on getting every single person, the people who wanted to be on the bus will start getting off because you will frustrate them. So this notion of knowing when you're not going to capture somebody and being able to move, and then dealing with those humans respectfully and say, hey, listen, the bus is going. I can tell that you don't want to be there. Here's what we're going to do to you. So don't dump them by the side of the road, but you do have to both move and deal with separately.
Can you talk a little bit about how you might know when it's someone that you should maybe reevaluate your own communication style versus it's someone who you may just not be able to bring on the bus?
Yeah, so the last one, you can't bring it on the bus. I always go, this is not necessarily true, but it works for me. I always presume that if a good person, and I always think the people who are working for me are good. I do. I think that they are well-intended, well-motivated. But if someone who I know to be good and capable isn't doing something, I'm like, man, I am missing something, right? Instead of thinking, well, they're just wrong, I'm like, what the heck am I missing? So to me, when I've got that gap between a good person who's not doing what I expect, what I usually say is, I call them in and I say, what am I missing? And usually by opening that up, people will share, right? They won't share a priori because they don't know who you are. But if you say to yourself, right, then I think you have an opportunity. So that's the direct approach. The indirect approach is you have just got to be listening all the time. Do we have one time for one quick story? So when I was the director of support, so I said, I'm literal, they're concrete. So one day I was trying to get them to show off their work. And so my head of logistics came and he said, Sue, I have the best thing. This past year, we airdropped 2 billion pounds of material, and we have never airdropped that much before. And I said, that's awesome, but I can't report that because I mean, yay, but why does that matter? Does that mean that we have supported more mission, or we have changed our logistics structure so we now, put that in context for me, right? Before I can set it up, right? Because I'm trying to get them to see outcome. I'm always about outcome. And they're describing things, and I don't want them to describe things. I want them to describe outcomes. So my team comes in a week later and they go, okay, Sue, I think we got it. A gallon of milk weighs 8 pounds. And so this is the equivalent of 3 trillion gallons of milk. I'm like, they're talking to me. I'm like, what in the world are they saying? They thought that I didn't understand what 2 billion pounds was. I wanted to know why 2 billion pounds mattered. And actually that event changed everything for me. So really sometimes just listening, and it's all about, can you listen to something that is different from what you expect and take the time to understand why that difference exists? Why did that person not react right? Why did you call somebody in and give them an award and they burst into tears and stormed out mad at you? Why are those things? So I just encourage you as a leader to always be thinking about unexpected reactions usually carry with them some sort of data that you can use and bring you closer.
Sue, I realized we should have checked this earlier. This group usually goes till about 8:45. Does that work for you for a few more questions?
It does if it works for you.
Okay, yes, of course. I want to transition gears a little bit. So about 70% of our participants are women. And it was really touching hearing your story, and I'm so sorry that that happened with your children. But It sounds like things ended up okay in the end, but I would love to hear what you might say to the women on the call who are afraid that they can't balance family and career, and what you might say to the men on the call, and what your advice to them would be so that they can be better allies either in their personal life or in the workplace.
So many lessons out of that one event. And it did work out great. My children are amazing. But I can also tell you, well, how do you think it was for my kids? I never told my children why I left because I didn't want them to feel that burden. So how lovely do you think it was for them to have me now home all the time? Okay, let's achieve today. They had me like, what? Go. So to the women, I would say don't decide ahead of time what you can't do. And you don't have to do it alone. You don't have to not talk to your bosses. That was probably one of the biggest mistakes I made. When I came back from that absence, one of the things I devoted myself to is to never not see somebody like me. My bosses should have seen what I was doing and that it was unsustainable and said, so you really don't have to work 3 days for every day. It's okay. And backed off. I don't regret the decision I made, but you do have some people you can talk to. So one, don't decide ahead of time what you can't do. Go ahead and try it. And try it because if you're confident that you will never not serve the mission, right? You'll never not deliver for outcome. Then if you find you can't do something, make the decision then. Don't decide ahead of time that you can't do it. 2, you're going to have help along the way. And 3, if you find you must make a choice, it isn't at all the end. My personal fear was, and my mom just passed away, but I know she will hear this when I say it. I was afraid that if I left the CIA, because I was a badass, that I was going to just be a housewife. And so I was afraid that all these things that I had accrued, all the things I'd learned, all the things I'd become, all of a sudden I was going to be giving them away and I would somehow be less. I will tell you, you are who you are. Like you think the circumstance makes you, it does not. You are all those things. So if you have to make a choice, go ahead and make that choice. And then be as big as you want to be in that, and then make a different decision. So after 7 years, I looked around, my daughter was in college. I'm like, I still have things I want to do. Right. So just don't. And then I guess the other piece I'd make for women is, I think the system tries to, or I always felt that as a woman, I was being judged for the things I didn't do rather than the things I did. Don't judge yourself on the things that you don't do. Make decisions. Sometimes you're going to make a decision that you absolutely refuse to be made to feel less. Don't ever work for someone who asks you to be less. Don't ever work for someone, and go ahead and make those decisions. And so all of those, I would say, feel confident. But do in your head know what you're deciding. Because the key to happiness is choice. The key to success is understanding that you don't control the consequences. And for the men, here's the cool thing is, I tell that story a lot. I love where we are as more women get into leadership positions, more men who do not look like white Civil War generals figure that they can be different kinds of leaders too. And they can make decisions about their life. So I would say, be supportive, don't be judgy, but also recognize that you have those same choices. Because I think sometimes men have a greater societal burden with that kind of choice than others. And for my male colleagues out there, all of you are such great guys that you can't imagine that any of your female colleagues are ever disenfranchised or ever made to feel less. Just because you would never do it, do not presume that no one would, and just be a little bit of supportive when they're in a bind, when they're trying to decide. Just kind of be there for them and don't presume that if they just tried harder, it wouldn't be a problem.
Well, thank you so much for those inspiring words there. Maybe we'll have this be our last question. So
Okay.
I think you talked about the importance of knowing your mission. And you gave an example with I think it was an executive order on transgender.
Right.
And how maybe your mission might have conflicted with some personal beliefs or ethics, but you thought you could change the system. Do you still think that you could maybe change the system looking back? And what can we do when we are faced with those types of difficult decisions?
Yeah, I don't know. This leadership thing is really hard and really different things. I think I always act as though I can achieve good outcome. I pursue it as hard as I can. I give everything that I can. I care about it that much. But I also know that there are other actors in the play. And if you kind of, I'm a sap, so I love Rudyard Kipling's poem "If," and he's got this great couplet that says, "If you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run." So one, I believe I can. I try and act as though I can, but I also try and make sure that at the end of every day, my effort is complete. There isn't any regret that I would have had or any other thing I've done. So if it ends unceremoniously, well, those were other actors, you know. John Brennan was the director of CIA and he could decide that he didn't want me anymore. The president. And here's the cool thing. Because of the way I believe about leadership, while I think I gave good things, I was not the most important thing. The women and men carry on, other leaders ascend, and hopefully they will pursue it in the same way I did. So I think you can hold those two things in your head, or I always try to, giving everything, believing you're important, and then recognizing that you're not that important, and that there are goodness. And we could have a whole conversation about the current political election thing. You know, we're a nation of laws and of systems where there is more strength in our system than in the individual, right? That's how we allow transitions to happen from good presidents to not good presidents as it's happened through time. I think that's a little bit the way I've tried to act. I both think I'm supposed to deliver my best, but I recognize that there are other bests that can pick up too.
Well, thank you so much. I think I speak for all of us. We're doing a virtual round of applause.
Thanks. Anything I can do for you, you all can reach me. You can reach me through Duke. If there's something you disagree with, come back at me. If there's anything I can do, I am now vested in your future. So I am here for you. Thanks, everyone.
Well, thank you. I will kick it back to, I think Alexis and Ben have one final thing before we.
Thanks, Sarah. You did a great job.
That was beautiful. Thank you very much, Sue. And thank you, Sarah, for facilitating the Q&A. Just going to recap some of the key points from Sue's talk. One was around, I have so many notes here. It's amazing. One is about leadership being an aggregate experience that had characteristics of doubt, uncertainty, and bravery. Sue had a very storied career that was highly nonlinear. The act of doing is absolutely key, and Sue talked about different truths, including that the most critical skill is decision making. This is a case of practice makes perfect, so making decisions is key, and some considerations around you, the mission, and community. Also, I loved when she said, you get to make the choice, you don't get to choose the consequences. It's something that she reiterated throughout the talk. It was a very key takeaway. In order to be a leader, to get followership, have a clear vision and believe the job can be done. Sometimes your leadership style and lexicon are not the same as your followership style and lexicon. And some people don't necessarily want to be there for their reasons. So you just need to be aware of that and know when you cannot necessarily capture someone. Advice to women, don't decide ahead of time what you can't do. You don't have to do it alone. If you have to make a choice, it won't necessarily mean that everything's over. And then don't judge yourself on the things you didn't do. Men have very similar choices and can be supportive in this endeavor. And finally, as was just said, giving everything and also giving those things, but realizing that you're not the most important thing can be very strong characteristics as you go through this leadership journey. So thank you very much, Sue. Hopefully that recap encapsulated your thoughts. We really appreciate you being here today, and thank you all for joining.